How would you define the term hookup?
I think the term hookup has to do with age more than it does with the word. So if you're in college, I think hookup means more like casual sex, but I think when you're in high school or younger, it means like just making out or like more than that, whatever like the person feels like. I think it's a very broad term, more than like other terms.
I think hooking up is when you have sexual relationships with someone, but you're not like committed, you're not dating, so you're just doing it for like the sexual part of it, I guess.
I guess hooking up with somebody would be to engage in like short-term or one-time sexual contact with somebody.
I define it as anything, whether including or before actually having sex. Any physical activity with another person.
I think hooking up is basically anything. Most people say just, sex, but I think it could be anything, making out.
Exchanging numbers and introducing each other to mother and father.
Maybe I could say like having full-on intercourse, but people also refer to it as just making out and maybe going from one to third base. So it depends on the person. Hookup is basically asking, hey, are you religious? No, okay, then we can have sex then. It's perfectly fine. There's no sin, there's no karma reaction over it. Basically, people don't understand that it's actually the laws of nature. We're being affected and controlled by the laws of nature. The laws of nature actually are covered and controlled by God. Basically means for every action is a reaction. So a sinful reaction is basically having sex without pleasing God.
I guess getting to know someone, as far as, getting to know someone, basically. Sometimes it could be long term, sometimes short term.
Do you think it's more desirable to have a committed relationship or date and sleep around in college?
For different people, I think it's different, just depending on your own health and security and your own emotional needs. For some people, it might be more beneficial to engage in a long-term relationship, but for some people who aren't ready for the emotional burden of a relationship, or maybe not a burden, but the emotional commitment of a relationship, or not necessarily emotionally mature enough, then maybe it's better to hook up. But for some people who it's difficult to distinguish the difference between hooking up with somebody and being in a long-term relationship, then that could also be a problem for that person. So I mean, it just depends on where you are and which is the healthier decision for you personally.
I think there are benefits to a committed relationship, but I don't think it has to be one or the other, because personally, like, I've been single, but that doesn't mean I've been sleeping around. So I feel like it's, again, up to the person.
I would say it's more desirable to have a relationship, but I think college students lean more and kind of are influenced into the hooking up culture.
I think it's more formidable to keep a relationship, like I mentioned, making phone calls to your spouse.
I think it's every person how they feel most comfortable with. Some people like to be in relationships, some people want to have fun and experience themselves and their bodies, and other people, so it's up to the person. For me, I like having relationships, but other people might feel differently, so I can say who to their own, Yeah. Well, it's like I said again, I mean, first of all, we have to know the definition of human. Human society stands for controlling the mind senses. If there's no mind controlling senses, then we're living our lives like animals. There's four things that are actually very similar to an animal to human. We have sex, we eat, we sleep, and we defend. Those are the four things that are very common in human and man. And if you really think about it, humans who do not control their senses are basically living their lives like animals. Basically living clothes. It's like animals wearing clothing, that's all it is. So basically, obviously the answer is definitely following a religious principle. Because all religions, what they have in common is restrictions to sex, especially sex, because sex is the most powerful sense gratifier. We all want to have sex. We're so attracted to sense objects. So for that saying, it's much better to basically, at least, even if not
follow God, but at least restrict yourself. Like even our great preachers, Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, all of them were actually celibate. They practiced restricting their senses, because obviously, how can you preach if you're basically such engaged in sense gratification all the time, you know?
Why do you think people are drawn to the hookup culture?
I think people are drawn to hooking up, because they're looking for a way to feel good, but also a way to express themselves sexually and connect with somebody on a deeper level.
I think people are just living a lot longer than we ever have before. The life expectancy it used to be in the 50s or 60s, and now it's like 80s, 90s. So I feel like it's just easier because we have so much to do before you actually settle down and get married, and that's just our culture now.
I would say media has something to do with that, definitely. Like younger teens and even college students seeing it on TV. That definitely has an influence on it.
I think people are drawn to hookup culture to outreach their life experiences.
I think that just generationally we have changed as kind of from how our parents used to do stuff to how we are now. So I think maybe society is just moving forward in a different way, and people are still lagging back, thinking a certain kind of way of thinking. I think that's why.
Like I said, no sense controlling. There's no purification in the mind. See, the problem is that people are looking for happiness, and they think that their happiness is actually believing and having sex or doing some sort of sinful activity. But actually what that does is it only causes just a flickering to our senses. But that doesn't satisfy us. So our senses are actually like a bully. For example, a bully comes up to you and asks you for money. Even though you give him the money you want, he still beats you up afterwards, after you give him everything you wanted. So the senses like that. The senses forces you to engage in this activity, and once you get some little purification, it punishes you afterwards in terms of karma.
Because it's no commitment. It's a lot of times you really don't have to put a lot into it,
In your opinion, what is the main repercussion of having casual sex?
Well, I think the main repercussion of having like casual sex would be like the obvious like STDs and like I don't know, like just being uncomfortable with the person too would be bad. And like respect for yourself is kind of gets in the way when you're trying to have sex without any like feelings attached.
I don't really know that there are repercussions to having casual sex per se. Maybe for different people in different circumstances there is, but in general I don't think there's anything necessarily problematic.
I don't think there's one repercussion of having casual sex. I think it really depends on the person and the people engaged in the relationship.
I don't think there are repercussions, just other than diseases. I mean, emotionally, I don't think there are any repercussions, so yeah, this is interesting.
I say leasing the vehicle nowadays. The prices are high on vehicle prices. Couples, couples.
Well, the different repercussions. You can have the other intimate repercussion in terms of like having to like meet up with them or call them, or am I going to be a boyfriend or girlfriend, or that kind of stuff can get awkward. And also a kind of like physical interaction, like STDs or STIs, what they're called now. So if you don't you're not protected about it, have pregnancies or some sort of sexual transmitted infection.
No mind and sense controlling. In terms of, because we have no sense controlling over our mind and senses, because our mind and senses are impure, it allows us to engage in sinful activities such as sex without getting married, religious sex. Basically, sex is a gift given by God. Basically allows us to have God-conscious children. Without that, everyone's just having sex like animals. Animals, they have sex anywhere, anytime, any place. Humans are doing the same thing now, having sex in bathrooms, having sex in fitting rooms, having sex outside. Basically, our human society is degrading due to the sense gratification that we always engage ourselves into. So without any purification, we'll continue to live our lives like animals, having sex and doing all these things. And obviously, the world's overpopulating. And then when there's overpopulation, their solution, material solution, is to abortion. Kill them, kill all the babies, basically, because then, but whose fault is that, though, you know? So without anybody really following the laws of God, there's no hope for human society. And sex is the main sense gratification, the most powerful sense gratifier for our body.
Unexpected children.
Do you think that premarital sex is more of the reason for young people getting married and/or early divorce?
I think for certain people it might impact their decision on getting married or divorced. I don't think that it's as black and white as getting married to somebody young is contingent on whether you've had sex or not, or getting divorced is eventually the decision based on sex. I mean, there's so much that goes into, like, you know, a large emotional commitment like that and a lifetime commitment like that, that sex is just like one of multiple factors. So I think that it's irresponsible to say that sex causes marriages to deteriorate. Maybe unhealthy sexual urges, sure, and a lot of people have those, but a lot of people are at different places in their own psychological well-being. Those factors weigh in heavier on the ability to maintain a long-term relationship, I feel, than just purely sexual motivation.
No, I think it's just a culture shift in general with the baby boomers all getting, you know, old at the same time at once. It's seeming like everything is changing right now, but I think it's just because there's such a gap in the population difference right now. So, I mean, I don't know, I think that's just the direction it's going because it's easier for us the way that we're living our lives now. We have a lot more opportunities because we're living a lot longer now.
I guess it depends on the situation, but I think a lot of the time it does have something to do with that. So.
I would say it would stick around for marriage for a little while, but eventually I think things would die down. Or, like a battery, just eventually go to separation.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes if they're not careful, usually what happens is leads to pregnancy and they feel like they have to get married. But I just feel that's like kind of a deeper issue in society that goes with not having sexual education in a lot of the schools. You know, some don't have them. So if the information isn't around, then how are they supposed to know what to do when they have sex? And then it turns out they're having that kind of stuff.
Now that's a really deep question. I know that in our society nowadays, marriage is a very disposable commodity. You know, people get married and they get divorced, and they get married again and they get divorced again, and it's kind of a revolving door. And you know, I personally don't go for that sort of thing. Once again, I think that if you find the right person and you have the interests in common and the goals in common, and you treat each other decently, you know, you can stay together for a lifetime. Like my parents are both gone now, but they were married for almost 60 years. And I'm not going to say that each and every day that they spent together was, you know, floating on a cloud sort of thing. They had their arguments, they had their difficulties, but they managed to tough it out and work it out, and I admire them for that. You know, actually, I think that, like my generation of people, kind of that hippie generation, baby boomers, whatever you want to call us, we're the ones who started to take the institution of marriage and kind of cast it into the gutter. You know, my parents' generation, which would be like the World War II generation, they handled the issue of marriage the way I think that it ought to be handled, an actual permanent commitment. And my generation of people, you know, like all generations of people, we have our good points and our bad points. I think our good points were we were opposed to violence and warfare and, you know, things like Vietnam and stuff like that. And that was a very valid and important position for us to take. But on the other hand, I think that we took the institution of marriage and just kind of trashed it. It kind of started with my people, all of this nonsense, let's call it.
Well, basically, I can at least explain the difference between a material situation, a material relationship, and a spiritual relationship. Material relationship is you have something I want and you got something I want. If I don't get what I'm asking for, then we don't communicate at all. There has to be some sort of a return exchange. While a spiritual relationship, there's actually detachment from our actual needs. So that means the spiritual attachment is there's God in the center of our relationship, and the material relationship is there's no God in the center. Actually, we do whatever we like, and sex is the main thing in that situation. And if sex is not performed correctly, then the relationship breaks up, which leads to many marriages, many sex offending, a lot of cheating, because the sex is not right. Because it's not just the sex is not correct, it's just that, like I said, compared to our senses, we can never fully purify our senses. And if that was the truth, then why is everyone suffering still? They're still going to clubs every Saturday night, but it's the same thing. They get like a little taste, and then the next day they wake up, they're still feeling depressed about something they're going over. So it just proves that the material enjoyment is actually false. It's not, and sex is the most powerful illusion that allows us to supposedly relieve our feelings, but that's actually false. It's pretty ignorant of people who just have sex because they just feel like it just relieves some, temporarily feeling. And it does, it's true, but it actually destroys the consciousness within ourselves. Makes us like animals. People are paying $200 just to have sex for, like, does that really sound human?
Early divorce. Yeah. It's an early divorce for sure.
How common was premarital sex while you were in your 20s?
I was born in 1950, so I was in my 20s during the 70s. Kind of the swinging 60s and the swinging 70s. I cannot speak for my entire generation of young people, but I can tell you that although I did have premarital sex when I was in my 20s, it was kind of few and far between. I wasn't what you'd call a swinger or a ladies' man or anything like that. I mean, I graduated from here in '72 and I just started working and saving up money for grad school, and I can only speak for myself. I just plain didn't have the time for that sort of thing. I was just kind of a workaholic, and to a certain extent I still am, even at age 63. So there it is. Other people might have had more fun in that respect, but I personally did not.
If you waited until marriage, do you think this benefited your relationship? If not, do you have a sense of regret?
Not waiting until marriage, I don't regret that. But now that I'm older and hopefully wiser, I can tell you this. I personally will not have sex with somebody unless I really and truly care about that person and that person really and truly cares about me. I don't do like casual sex, So I'm not in a relationship now, so it's just going to have to wait, until I'm in a real, meaningful relationship.
What would your advice be to couples today?
My advice to young couples today would be, and it's not easy advice, but since you asked the question, just try and find a relationship with somebody that you really care about, that really cares about you, where you have interests in common, where you can talk to each other, where you can listen to each other. You like the same kinds of music. You like to do the same sorts of things together. And just try and wait for that special person, I guess is what I'm saying.